I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. On this video, we're going to be messing back around with the 73 Challenger. We're going to take it from this state and turn into this. As you can see, we got most of the body panels, the quarter panels, the trunk, inner structure on the car. Everything is clamped and basically rough fit into place. Why we're doing this is basically get a good handle on making sure everything fits. As you can see, the outer structure, nothing's prepped right now. But on the last video, if you saw, for instance, we installed these door skins and we put the doors, we bolted them on the car. I showed you how I go about getting a baseline on the door. Now that our quarter panels, we have them screwed along on the inside here. They're not moving. They're clamped really good, so we know this is about where it's going to fit. I profiled the door to make sure our gaps and everything, it's a little tight there, but everything down is looking good. We also profiled them to make sure they're going to line up with the quarter panels, and we adjusted, we pulled, pried on them, everything else. And on the next install, I'll show you how we go about doing that. We also know that right here, we're good there. We're also lined up here that this is sticking out a little bit. We're actually going to have to modify the quarter panel and we're going to make some relief cuts. I'll show you how we're going to do that. But all in all, this door skin fits really good. It aligns real well with the quarter panel. Let's go take a look at the other side with the AMD one on there. You see, we still haven't got these quarters, the bottoms in yet. We're gonna pull those in after. Again, we're mostly focusing on the inner structure and just getting a good estimation and on the door skin. So if you look right here, the body lines line up real good. This is the AMD to AMD quarter panel. All the quarter panels are AMD. The only part on this car is the Dynacorn on that door skin. But it's profiled really nice down here, and same thing. This one's actually a little bit worse than the Dynacorn. I'm gonna roll it in probably a little bit more looking at it. You could see this top one can come in a little bit. So we're gonna adjust on this door, just rolling the top in and fixing that. But we'll come back to that. We're gonna fix this one the same way. We're looking at the trunk. We have just a trunk set on there. It's not even on the hinges. All we care about right now, we care about the body line here and here, the gaps basically, making sure those don't look ridiculous, and they do look pretty good. So if we go ahead and remove this trunk, we'll take a look at the inside and what we did. So what our main focus is right now, this stuff is everything here is just screwed in place. We're focused on the outer wheel wells and the trunk extensions. Now that we did all this, we know we can go ahead and weld our outer wheel wells to the inner wheel wells and weld our trunk extensions. We're gonna blow this whole car apart, and we gotta weld one more bracket before we do that. So let's go take a look at a video on the trunk extensions, outer wheel houses. I gotta make some marks on where we're gonna clean up, what we need to modify, fine tune that door, and then we'll put some brackets on the quarter panels, and we'll come back and blow this car apart, and I'll show you how we went about assembling it. Starting from the beginning on this install, the first thing we're going to do is grab the outer wheelhouses. A lot of times I do the inner wheelhouse and outer wheelhouse at the same time. We test fit them and then pull them back off, weld them beforehand, and then we install them together. But with this car, talking to owner, we decided to keep the inner wheelhouse. So what we're going to do is just install the outer wheelhouse basically in the outside of the car the whole entire way. It's not exactly the same. I'll show you a little bit further along what we ended up doing, but it will work for this build. After that, now we're attacking the trunk drop-off extension. What we're doing right here is I'm pulling it in a little bit. It wasn't fitting exactly perfect into the trunk, and you see how it kind of rolled the bottom out a little bit more. There's going to be some adjustment in this trunk extension. The reason we're doing the outer wheelhouse and trunk extension and we're screwing them in and test fitting everything is to make sure they're in the right place for when we put the quarter panels on. If you get your quarter panels on and they're not in the right place, just be aware where you put your clamps, or if you decide to screw these in, that you can access them from with the quarter panels on and then move them accordingly. Right now, this is about where the old ones came out, so I'm pretty confident that going back together, we shouldn't have a problem with the quarter panels fitting. On these outer wheel houses, just focus on first getting the inside lined up on both the inner and outer wheel houses where you put your seam sealer. Move it with a hammer. The clamps, you'll be able to kind of slightly move them up and down and get it in the right position. Right here with this trunk drop-off extension, I had to pull out the monkey on the stick. You see that corner was just too far down, so we had to help it along before we screw it in place. This is what you're going to have to do. All right, we're back now. I got the car all marked up where I'm going to clean up, where I'm going to drill my holes. I told you we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how to install these quarter panel support brackets. Normally on these Challengers and Cudas, I don't take these brackets off, but this car was so rotted away, if you saw previous videos of it on the inner structure, that nothing was even holding the back of these on. So I just cut the front of them to make it easier to take everything apart, repair the inner structure, and now that we got the quarter panels test fit on the car, we're gonna tack these in place, pull the carb out and finish welding them, knowing that's where they need to go. So I'm going to show you how to do that. They've been sandblasted. We put weld through primer on them, and you can see this is our quarter panel set on the car. So how we're going to install them, they're basically the front. You can see where I cut it. It goes on like this. These pieces go towards the inside on both sides. So it's going to weld up in this support back here, and then this piece where I cut it is going to go right there. So let's stick it on and I'll show you what else we got to line up. So we'll get the front end first, just like that. Back goes up. Now right there is where we're going to go. Let's turn on the welder. I could have had the welder on beforehand, but. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to go ahead and tack the front in place. And now what I want to make sure where the window felt is going to go in, it's going to hook in there, that we're clear there. Now, that's not saying you can't take a deburr in there and really clean it up, but we're lined up with our old mark. Everything looks good. Get the welding helmet on and tack it right on top. All right, we got a tack that's going to hold. Now we want to look, another thing to now watch out for, we need to make sure this screw, that's why I like to leave this part of the bracket on, this screw in that hole is going to line up with the indentation of the quarter panel. And you see back here, same thing, we want to make sure we have enough mark for the window felt there. And we'll go ahead and take a screwdriver and hold that up there. Now we're going to first, we're going to clamp it on the quarter panel where we need it first, because it's going to try to want to move on me. So you have a different pair of vice grips in there. All right, it's a weird angle, but you see we got it vice gripped in there, the brackets lining up there, the holes lining up there, everything looks like it's lined up. So now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna push up on this corner over here, push it back where it sits in there really good. And then we'll go ahead and put a couple tacks back there. All right, so as you can see now, the bracket's marked out. Now what we're gonna do, just to show you how I do things, I'll come back through and I know I'm gonna drill a couple holes, so I'm gonna put a couple holes there. I mark my bracket where I want to put my spot welds. So we're gonna put those holes in there, and that's gonna clamp this bracket in place when we go to final install on this thing. So we're gonna blow this car apart, we're gonna finish prepping the panels, and we'll come back and I'll show you how to build this car now that we've done test fit it. So we got all our panels for the most part off the car. We got them cleaned up and in weld through primer. There's certain areas you could see that have holes in them that I'm going to rosette weld them. That's where my spot welder can't reach. Other areas like right here, we should be able to clamp it. The spot welder will be able to reach. But you can see we got our panels up there. I also pulled the drip rails off the car. This is going to make the quarter panel installation a little bit easier. They're going to screw back in the same spot, so I'm not super worried about them, and we will test fit the roof as we're going on. You can see right here, we also still have to weld this bracket. We'll do that first thing tomorrow. Also, we did pull the quarter panels off, but I did not touch this outer wheelhouse. What we're gonna end up doing, this we know is in place when we put our quarter panels back on. So I just pulled the clamps after I screwed it, and now this thing, it can't move. If you look, this is actually not the way the factory would install this. The reason we're doing this lip right here is supposed to be on the inside sandwiched behind this piece and the inner wheelhouse. But really on this car, to do that and do that job, we would have had to pull the inner wheelhouse out and destroy a lot more parts. Talking to the owner, we agreed that putting this on the outside, no one's judging this car for originality. This is gonna be the best of both worlds. It's gonna give a strong repair. It's gonna be a quality repair. It might not be 100% factory. And same thing, we're not gonna weld on the tab that's supposed to be there. I'm gonna just do a joint weld right there. And underneath, we're gonna go through the two lips of this because there is a little gap, and I'm gonna weld up the whole seam. So that's what we're gonna do here. When I go to weld the back, we'll use these clamps on the rosette welds. And you still, when I do that, these two clamps are really good. They get everything really close together, and then we'll do our rosette welds. I could have used my spot welder here, but since we were already rosette welding with the MIG welder up there, I'm gonna just continue the whole inner wheel well install that way. So, and then we'll just move these right up the line and keep welding, and then pull our screws out once we got our weld in place. So what we'll do now too while we're here, I did pull the trunk hinges off. I just put them in weld through primer, protect them. We'll go ahead and epoxy them a little bit later. They've been sandblasted and cleaned up, but now we are gonna need them on. You see, that's how the trunk hinge would go on for the Challengers and Cudas. They got this little tab that I did kind of rebend. So put that on there, and we'll just pop it on with a socket, and that's it. So now that's in place, we'll make sure we do the other side, and we don't want to forget that you could get it under there, but it's a lot easier right now. You see, same thing, we are going to go ahead and weld up this piece and back here. These are the things that I'm going to start welding first, and then we'll go do our exterior panels. Walking over to quarter panels, you could see I also did prep them. How I did, remember our gap that we were talking about up here. I put slice relief cuts in there, and you see what that's gonna enable us to do is kind of modify and bend this, where this one can't bend. So then we'll come back through and we'll re-weld. Again, you could see this perfect example. Right here is where my spot welder can't reach, and then right here to here it can reach. So I'll just spot weld that. You could also see in a lot of this stuff, actually here's another challenge. We're talking about Groundhog Day. As soon as we're done with this one, in a few days we're going to be jumping on this one, where this one just kind of test fit in place and everything, not completely clamped on. So I do a couple of these things. The next one in line, that one won't be filmed, but you can see I put all my weld through primer on the inside of these quarter panels, but exterior wise, well, I'll leave it bare metal, so my spot welder's got a good grip on both sides, that I can get a good contact. But we want to prevent the corrosion. That's why we're welded in between the two panels where they sandwich in on this area. And then we'll come back through with paint on both sides when we're done for exterior rust protection. But right now, I would say if you're welding, try to focus on what you're doing and leave the exposed side bare metal, and then you'll get a better weld, and then come back through and finish it up later. So let's start tomorrow morning. Actually, it's late tonight. We'll start the welding process. I'll bring you back, and we'll start getting this car back together and take the next step. So here we are starting the welding process. Like I said, we're going to get the bracket first. We took care of that. Now we know our wheel houses and our trunk drop-off extensions are in place. Nothing's going to move, but we're going to still work in a certain pattern. So you see I'm working at the back of the wheel houses. I'm welding, like I said, with the clamps squeezing down on the vice grips, welding in between them, and then when I pass a screw, I go ahead and I pull it back out and I come back through and weld that screw hole. I try to stay in a certain rhythm and a certain pattern just so I don't miss anything. Right here on this support coming down off the B-pillar, I'm going to just go ahead and weld it up. It's missing the tabs. We rebuilt it. Same thing. Talking to owner, I know where he wants this car. Actually, it's a lot stronger to weld something like this than just spot weld or rosette weld 3 or 4 holes on each of the pieces. So this is going to be the better version of what we're trying to do here. The owner's going to be okay with it. Not exactly how a factory would do it, but again, not all these cars are built like factory. We're repairing them, not doing complete rebuilds all the time. Working on this wheelhouse, you don't have to start from the back. So this one, I started in the front and I'm working my way back around. Again, everything's clamped into place. I use tons of screws, tons of clamps. So as long as I start from one end and kind of work it out towards the other, it's not that big of a deal. What I also like to do is right here on the wheelhouses on the Challengers and Cudas sometimes, my spot welder has a hard time gripping from the bottom, or we don't always get the best seal. So seam sealer covers this area, but I'm going to go ahead and run a MIG bead just to make sure this corner is really strong, especially since I can't get to it when the quarter panels are on. So this side did have some of the tabs you saw on the side where we did do the rosette welds. What I told you I was going to do, here's some pictures of me going back through the inner seam before I clean it up and welded up the whole channel to really close off that gap. Now that the wheel houses and trunk extensions are both welded up on both sides, you see I did put some seam sealer around it, and then I covered it with red etching primer on the bare metal just to make sure, since we probably won't be able to get paint back in here, that this doesn't rust. At that point, you see, we started with the deck filler panel because I know where the deck filler panel was going to be. We put screw holes in there in place, and we know those screw holes, everything fit back on the car. So once we got the deck filler panel screwed into place and everything's good there, now we're going to turn our attention to the quarter panels. I started on the back of this quarter panel just because I know how this quarter panel went on there. Normally, I like to start where the deck filler matches up with the quarter panel. We're going to have to go back through. You could see these quarter panels kind of curve up a little bit. I did relief cut them and I did have to pull them down. I'll show you that in the future. But right now we start on the deck filler again. Now we're working our way to the front. We're trying to profile the door and the quarter panel, and it's sitting too high and too far out. So what we're going to do, we're going to ratchet off the inside of the car to the frame jig, and that's pulling that whole quarter panel in to make sure we can profile right with the door. Once I do that, I go back through and I'm drilling the holes and putting some screws in it just to make sure that nothing here moves. Compared to the initial fitment, this is the final weld up. This is where everything has to be as close and as perfect as we can get it. So we're really spending some extra time and really fine tuning the details. Once we get the front, now I'm working to the bottom of the quarter panel. I'm lifting up that edge right along the rocker, and then I'm kind of just massaging the panel as tight as I can around the wheelhouse. You cannot use, in my opinion, enough clamps. You see, I'm using one pair of these vice grips to kind of pull the quarter panel all the way in to the outer wheelhouse to make sure it doesn't stick out. What you don't want to do is look down the side of your car and then really see it bowing out. So pull it in tight and then screw it down. We are going to now we got the quarter panel in place, address the top of that quarter panel where it was kind of just flat. You see I'm taking a pry bar and I'm kind of re-drilling that hole to the shape of the door. Once I put one screw in, I close the door and I double check my work and I move up 3 or 4 inches. These spots that you really have to fine tune a little more or your panels aren't exactly right, you're going to have to put a lot more screws and you're going to have to spend a lot more time. Be prepared for that. The doors are also lined up. We will go back through after this and do a better fitment of the doors right after all the quarter panels and trunk and everything is in place. Turning our attention onto the passenger side quarter panel, my wife's helping me get the deck panel, like I said earlier, aligned. This one did fit a little bit better on this side, so we were able to clamp the deck filler panel first. And again, now I'm working my way to the front of the quarter panel, focusing on the door gap. This one also had to be pulled in, so we're going to hook the ratchet strap up on both sides. It's not a big deal. I think this is why you need the frame jig, really, to get this stuff super tight. You don't want your car kind of bowing out or get wider than it has to get. You want, when you look down this car, to really have sharp, straight lines. Another thing to do, after you get this thing all test fit in place before you weld up, you see, minus the inner structure where we won't be able to access again, I haven't done any welds at this point. I'm putting tons of screws, tons of clamps, and then once everything's done, what I'm going to go back and do, I'm going to stare at this car for 15, 20 minutes, just looking around all different corners of the car. It really helps if you're into the hot rods like me, and then you could sit there and just look at them and just find out what's wrong with it and start moving some stuff around and make it even better. The time you spend here is the time that the final product's going to come out a lot better. Catching up to the video, you saw we did the tail panel installed, followed by the trunk gutters. If you do other quarter panels, sometimes they're welded on. The AMD do come off separate and you have to weld them on. This is kind of good in a sense that you have a little bit more adjustability, but it also kind of stinks and there is a little more work involved. But you see, you kind of just wedge them up in there, and what it is, the quarter panels aren't close enough. So you see what I did, I'm clamping 2 ratchet straps on there and I'm pulling them together to make sure I get my trunk seals and everything in place. You're going to have to clamp ratchet straps on here, vice grips, and do a lot of pulling on this stuff just to make it perfect. There's going to be a lot of fine tuning. I can't say it enough. Don't be afraid to relief cut something if it's not working right. These panels are great, but they're still not perfect. Speaking of these panels not being perfect, after looking at these quarter panels, they kept kind of trying to curve up where the tail panel just has to be lower. It was too high, setting the trunk too high. So what we did, we had to pull it apart and we went and hammered the floor pan down, and we're going to fix it with the body hammer to get a real crisp edge. We're talking about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. Like, this is the type of stuff that you have to be prepared to pull the panels back off and think about what you're trying to do and how to fix it. Again, we're taking the ratchet straps. We're going to yank down on this tail panel, knowing it has to go down just that 1/4 inch, because when you look at a Challenger, it's pretty much flush and flat across the back. I did relief cut all corners of these quarter panels just because I think the stamping it was a little bit off. It was trying to go up a little bit. Not a big deal. Once we relief cut them, we can get them down level with the trunk and then weld them up when everything else is done. The final step as far as our fitment phase, we're going to put the trunk on. This is a brand new trunk, but we need to make sure it fits with the rest of the panels. We're going to have to do some adjustment. This is a lot of time right here getting this stuff right, and we're trying to get it as close as we can. The trunk, once we put it on, it was a little bit off. We're also moving the trunk arm supports here, the latches. I'm measuring them, making sure they're centered off each other, and we're kind of just moving them in and out. If we get this right, what you'll see at the end of this video, we don't have to use any shims like most of these cars have, but the trunk gaps on both sides will be perfect. So this is where you can fine tune your trunk gap and just keep putting it on there and moving these brackets left and right so you get your trunk exactly where you want it. It's steps like this that really is going to save your car with the body shop down the road, or if you're doing the body work yourself, so much hassle. Also, don't be surprised if this takes
a little bit to really fit. This does not just go on the first time and everything fits perfect. But once you get it like it is, we did ratchet it in place. We didn't put the trunk latch on there at this point. I don't think it's needed. We were able to ratchet it and make sure the trunk does close in spot. I do like to put the trunk on and the doors on without the latches because I feel like it's a lot better, and you don't want the latch to moving it. I want the hinges to actually tell me where the trunk's going to move, and that's what we want to center off of. Now, everything fits perfect. Everything's where I want it. We're starting to weld up phase. Just like the clamping phase, I think the deck filler to quarter panels is a spot on these cars that I like to start with first. It's really hard to MIG weld. You see, I'm kind of spoiled here with the spot welder. I could just reach up in there, lay in the trunk, and just clamp this thing down. Once I get them in place, I'm kind of working from the center, kind of mid-car. I know it's a little backwards, but I'm kind of just getting this whole trunk area because it's the base of the back of this car, and everything kind of was built around it. I'm going to weld that first. The trunk gutters aren't attached to anything but the quarter panels, so while I'm in the trunk, I'm going to work my way down the trunk gutters, but I'm not welding them to the tail panel yet. If you see, I'm stopping right at the end of the trunk gutters. The deck filler now is welded to the trunk hinges also and welded to the center support. So really this whole trunk area minus the tail panel is going to be welded up first. I don't think it's going to affect anything else on the car, but like I said earlier, the whole car's clamped and screwed into place. It's really not going anywhere. The reason we're doing this is just to make sure we don't run into any major issues. Now, we're going to work our way to the front of the deck filler panel, kind of working around the window channel. I'm starting in the center, and I'm working towards the outside. When I'm done, you see now I'm going to the driver's side, working in the center and working my way out towards the outside. What we're going to do, you'll see in a second, is we're going to get the spot welder back out and we're going to go right up the window channel. We're trying to make sure we're pushing the metal, even if it is screwed and clamped, right down the line to make sure it doesn't bind up or try to bow up anywhere. You see this process, I'm going back and forth between the spot welder and the MIG welder. I like to use the spot welder as much as possible, but I'm trying to make sure that I have to be able to reach both sides of it. There's a lot of point on these cars that I can't reach both sides, that we'll have to use the MIG welder. Working down the B pillar, you see, we're just going to continue right back down. I'm taking a hammer, I'm hitting all the clamps in place and the screws in place, and then now we're just following a pattern. You see what we're doing. We're going to start the top of the quarter panel and we're going to put a weld. You see, I'm kind of massaging the edges and just making a crisp line and just dial in my body lines. I'm trying not to hit the door at this point in time because the quarter panel is more maneuverable, and I did like the door, how the door profiled on its own. So you see, we weld a little bit, we pull out a screw, and we close the door. We check our profile, making sure we're not changing anything or getting too lost in what we're trying to, the final outcome of the door curvature being. I'm going to just show you this side of the car for time's sake, but now that we worked our way down, I did use a spot welder on some of the quarter panel. You'll see in the final pictures where I was able to reach and where I wasn't. I worked my way to the bottom, MIG welded up that rocker panel. The reason I did that, that's 3 pieces. So I don't trust a spot welder on 3-4 pieces where the rocker panel's extra thick. So we're going to go ahead and MIG weld it. I'm not using the 3-phase like you would in the factory. So that's why I do MIG weld that when I could reach it. That goes for frame rail pieces too. I'm usually going to weld all my frame rail pieces. Now, and you see at this point, I'm working my way with the spot welder now with this different attachment right around the wheelhouse. It's real easy. What you would do here is you would just MIG weld it. And the same way we did the outer wheelhouse, I would probably just take a pair of those vice grips and just clamp it, weld it, clamp it, weld it. You see now we worked our way down the back of the quarter panel. We're just following this rhythm and we're going to work and we're going to meet at the tail panel, working our way up the whole back of it. Just a little at a time. Again, might have to fine tune your body lines. Focus on what you're doing and keep looking at the car. Make sure nothing's out of whack. There's no big surprises and you're not pushing metal around. So feel free to stop and just keep looking. In between these cuts on the video, there's a lot of times I'll do that. At this point, we're pretty much welded on the whole quarter panels all the way to the top of the tail panel where we met the trunk gutters. We're going to start in the center of the tail panel to the floor pan. And again, this would be on your MIG welder, but we're going to use the spot welder with this attachment. You see how much easier it is. So we start in the center and we work our way in about 1 inch increments, give or take, and you're working your way right down, creating good solid welds, and that's going to really just tie in the whole back of the car. At this point, this thing should be really looking sharp, it should be looking clean, and the body line should be pretty tight. Something else I've talked about that really helps making these cars a lot nicer and makes my whole process of building these cars easier is the frame jig. You could see right here I got the 2 supports in the back going to the shackles. What that allows me to do is just jump in this trunk and really be real heavy on this car and not worry about bending anything else. So really there's some advice right there. You see right now we're winding up and we're finishing the last final install, tying in the tail panel to the trunk gutters. We already welded them to the top of the quarter panels and we're just finishing this off. We are now, since we got some time and, you know, I don't want to do a separate video, we're going to go ahead and put the roof on this car. I went ahead and installed the drip rails back in place. Now, they were put on the car and the roof was already been test fitted in a previous video you saw when we were doing the inner structure. So I know the roof fits on these trunk gutters perfect. They were screwed in place. We did test fit the roof one more time before I welded this up on the quarter panels. Again, just to make sure. Once you weld these drip rails on, I mean, you can cut them off, but man, that's a lot of work that you don't need to do. So spend that extra time, walk the roof over there, clamp it down, test fit it, make sure, just like the rest of the car, make sure there's no surprises. It's really going to save you a bunch of time and energy down the road. Welding these drip rails up, same process. They're screwed in place. You're going to put the MIG welder on them, just tap it down, make sure everything's flush, don't hit the drip rail itself, and you see right now, we cleaned it up and put weld-through primer in preparation for the roof. What I also like to do on these Challengers, I'm using 3M panel bonding adhesive. So you see I'm being real aggressive with this stuff. We're laying it on heavy, and that's going to really support the top of this roof where we can't weld it and make sure it really locks into that roof support really well. Now I'm going to go start clamping this roof in place. How I'm clamping this roof is how I'm going to go through the process of welding this roof. I personally like to start in the front of this roof. That's not saying it's the only way. And I like to work my way down the drip rails, pushing all the excess metal towards the back of the roof. Once I get the drip rails done, I like to start in the center of the window channel, and now again I'm clamping and I'm going to be welding, pushing it towards the outside, and I finally will finish up in the lead seam of the B-pillar. What you see me right now doing is putting supports under there, pushing that center support for a couple hours and make sure it sticks and the glue's tight on there so it's really adhered well to the roof. I also did sand down that roof and prep it with a DA as per the 3M instructions. Wrapping up this roof install, it's going to be the same process. Like I said, we're following the same pattern. The great thing about the roof for what I'm doing is my spot welder will reach everywhere but the B-pillars on this whole roof. So it makes it a lot easier where I'm looking underneath because there's a bunch of the headliner, the teeth that stick out that the headliner wraps up under, and there's also some trim supports and some visor stuff under there. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I don't burn anything else. Working my way down the drip rails, this same attachment worked really well. I just running down the drip rails. When I get close to a pair of vice grips, I pull it off. I did leave that front vice grip in place. I didn't weld there yet. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get most of the roof done. That's also a thicker piece, so I'm going to turn up the spot welder. And what you can do at home, you can work your way down and at the very end just work that corner. And I like to MIG weld that whole corner where you're going to put the lead in the front. And just I like to just MIG weld the whole thing. I know that's not how the factory does it. It's not going to hurt it. It's going to be covered with some kind of lead or filler. Finishing up, you see we did weld the rest of the roof like I said we're going to weld it. At this point, we're just clamping the last piece of our B panel in place. I should be wearing gloves. You see I burnt myself. It happens. But we're going down. You see I'm really making sure we got a good tight fit. We're going to hammer it, weld a piece in. You see there's screws. There's probably 8 to 10 screws just on this one piece, a screw every 3 inches. Or if I see an area that sticks up, we put a screw there to pull it down. It's not a big deal. You go back through and weld your screw holes up. It's just another area. And you see where I finish up. At this point, what helped me in the past and really got this car supported and in place now needs to come off. We're going to put the rear valance on this car, and there's no way to get the rear valance on this car with this frame jig mount in place. So we'll go ahead and remove it. The whole back of the car is welded up. It supported itself. It's exactly where we want it. There's going to be no problems and no hassle pulling off this frame jig piece, and we'll come back to in a second and we'll do a walk around of the car all assembled.
We got all the exterior structures on the Challenger. You see it looks a lot different than when we started this video. I love this part of the cars when they start coming together and taking shape. We still have some work to do, but let's do a quick walk around. I'll show you where we are and where we're going on this Challenger. I had to adjust the trunk a little bit. It still needs some work, and there's still a little imperfection over here. The body lines on both sides look good. Most of the height here looks really good. We did pull these corners down a little bit with a board and just let them roll down. There's some work that's going to have to be done over here, but you see all this has been welded with the spot welder. We got the rear valance on, the floor pans welded. Everything's also going to be put in an etching primer. So right now I'm just showing you the bare metal work. We have the deck filler, fits really nice to the quarter panels. Looking down this quarter panel, you could see it's profiling really nice. The body work in general looks really good, and you got to remember this is a car at this point that doesn't have any filler. This is just the factory e-coat. We're still going to strip this down. We do have some work to do on the door gaps. Let's take a look at those pictures right now. I'll show you the differences.
This is the Dynacore door skin to the AMD quarter panel.
So looking at that picture, you can see the Dynacore is just a little bit wider at the top, and it really does fit from here down. All the body lines here and here line up perfect. This one, it does come down a little bit. So there's some work we're going to do on the gap. Be prepared. If you're doing this at home, this is completely normal. But right now, we're not going to mess with this. As much as I want to fix this right now and make it look perfect, we're going to have to wait till we install the fender in the front end. Because what you might do, you might find out the door might need a little bit more adjustment. This is a give or take. So just put the fender on, get all the body components done on the car, then we could come back and just fine tune this gap. Be prepared for that. We can do the trunk and just make the trunk gap perfect right now, but I like to just do all the gapping at the same time. So the trunk is 95% of the way there. We're gonna leave it the way it is. We did clean up this whole area on the lead channel. We're actually not gonna put lead on this car, I don't believe. I think we're gonna use all metal. I gotta talk to the owner about that. And then you see we did spot weld up the whole drip rail area. The roof's done. You saw the support, the glue right here. It really does strengthen up the car. The wheel wells too, same down here. We got the wheel wells all the way around, all the spot welders, everything on this car is solid. It's in place. From the firewall back now, we're basically done with the rough work. We're gonna fine tune it once we get the front end on. Let's take a look at the other side and do a walk around there, and I'll show you what we got over in that way. Walking around on this side right now, you can see the trunk fits really good. We did do, like I said before, the profiling on it. The corners here lined up really nice. The valance right here, it might need a little bit of work, but in general, it's set in place and it's where we're gonna be. The bumper is not on the car. I'll do that when I do the panel gapping of everything else. We'll set the bumper on and make sure they look good. Right here, same thing. All the body lines here look good. The roof line, we'll end up trimming this area down during the panel gapping and the fine tuning, and we're also test fit the rear window in place. You see we did our spot welds up there, the lead channel down here, everything's nice and straight, and same thing up here. Looking down at this side, we did put this patch in place, so that ended up down there. This is all welded up. Again, this side's pretty solid, and now this AMD door, it did fit a lot better. I'll show you a picture right now what we're looking at on the gap on this side.
You could see the top gap compared to the Dynacorn, how much tighter this AMD panel is.
It's still not 100% perfect, but it's a lot closer than the Dynacorn one. It's got a nice 3/16 gap all the way down. We got to take the center hump just out a little bit. Again, some fine tuning. The profile right here does look a lot better on the door on this side than on the other side. Like I said, if we had the Dynacorn quarters, I wonder if the AMD door would not fit as good, but we're not going to know with this car. Each build's slightly different. All in all, using different body panels and stuff, and that's all we could get at the time. This really, I'm happy with it. I think we've exceeded the owner's expectations, and really profiling this door, looking down it, it's really close. Again, we haven't done any filler on the car. It's really close. It's awesome to see this car in brand new metal. So, saying all that, where we're at, you see, like I said, we're done with the whole back of this car on the sheet metal body. You see, we already got one of the frame jig mounts removed, so we just have one mount in the back and then a couple mounts up front holding it. We're gonna now get to, on this car, the front end. You could see on the front, if you haven't, if you saw in the video, this thing looks like a first gen F body with a clip on it. No fenders, no inner structure. So that's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to fix all the crash damage. You saw in a previous video, we did put the frame rails in this car, so that's the only thing we have to go off of. The owner's getting me some front suspension, and I'm going to show you, we're going to do the front end, I think a little different. We're going to put the front end on, but I'm going to show you how I go about aligning the cars and making sure we have the proper camber caster, and we're not just throwing the front end on the car and say it looks good and then sending it down the road and then the alignment man can't get this thing done. So that's where we're at. I hope this video really helped you out. I know it was kind of sped up a lot. It was a lot of work done in a short amount of time. I'm assuming in this video you know how to weld, you know how to put rosette holes for MIG welding in the car, you know about the basics on doing something like this. If you don't know anything like that and you just watch the video, see how it's done and assembled, then that's really cool too. I appreciate it. But for the most part, this was just a quick rundown on how to go about putting the panels on place, what panels go in first, and the general idea on how these cars are built. Some of this stuff, if we get in the future, we'll kind of do an in-depth dive on just a quarter panel install or something smaller like that. But hopefully this video, you learned something from it. Hopefully it entertained you. Hopefully that we can do more of these in the future. And if you're into this build, this Challenger build, it's coming along pretty nicely, and you can do your Challenger in a similar aspect. So like, comment, subscribe to our channel. We're going to try to keep pushing out more videos. I got the other Challenger, the 72 you saw early in the video. We're going to knock that car out next week, and maybe I'll show some welding on that, because we're doing a similar install to this. Obviously all the panels will be installed on the car, but there's going to be some small touches that the owner wants us to be slightly different. So maybe I'll be able to show you that on the channel, and stay tuned for that. And again, thanks for sticking along.
Just in wrapping everything up, I'm going to show you a couple pictures that we didn't get to on the final walk around of the car, of the inner trunk structure, the wheel wells from the inside, the trunk when it's open with the gutters all welded up, and just looking down the sides from the front. Thanks again for checking out this 73 Challenger. Good luck on your project. This is Rick from Carthage Classic Cars, and we'll see you on the next video.